Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another Burlingame It's a Small Town podcast, sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. My name is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark at the Mic, and my guest today is the man who gets all the news out before it's news, Jon Mays, Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Journal. Jon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Certainly. It's my pleasure.
So before we get going, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm the editor-in-chief of the San Mateo Daily Journal. I've been doing that since 2000, about 2 months after the paper started. Started in August of 2000, and I came around in October of 2000. Before that, I was the editor of the San Mateo Independent, which was a twice-weekly newspaper since 97. So I've been reporting or editing in this area for 25 years now. So I used to be the kid who used to go to all the meetings, and now I'm kind of the older guy, which is fine.
Sure.
But I think you wanted to know about how I got into journalism in the first place,
yes,
right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'll tell you, it started with, I thought typing was cool. And it's because my grandmother was a newspaper editor in the Central Valley over about 20, 25 years or so. In between kids, she would go back as the managing editor of the Lodi Sentinel. And some other publications, too. She started one called the Lodi Life and Times in the late 70s. And so when I was a kid, I'd go over to their house. They had a farm in Lockford. And she would file her stories on a manual typewriter, and she smoked Marlboro Reds. So she had the smoke going and this manual typewriter. If you know manual typewriters, you have to slam the carriage. And she typed very fast. And I remember just thinking that was just cool, right? That I wanted to do that for a living. So I figured typing was better than smoking for a living. Mm-hmm. So I just started wanting to type. And I noticed that when I went and visited with her to the grocery store, all the farmers would come up and talk to her about what was going on. And she asked a bunch of questions, and they had a bunch of requests. And she was always saying, well, let me see what I can do. Right? And I felt like that kind of service was good. She was sort of the person who was in the know and who could help people out if need be. She could make calls, she can connect people, and it just kind of seemed like a good thing to do. And I liked writing. I liked writing as a kid. So when I was in 8th grade, I started a paper at my middle school, and I did like profiles of the new kids and teachers and had a horoscope and all these kinds of things. And when I was in high school, I worked on the high school newspaper. And in college, I started a magazine with a friend for my generation, Gen X. And it was supposed to be more of like a serious magazine about politics and finance and real things rather than just music and fashion, although we had a little bit of that. So I've always kind of been in the realm of wanting to be in the know and connect people and write. And newspapering is sort of the perfect type of profession for someone like me.
It sure is, and the whole print media thing fascinates me. Can you just tell me what a day in the life of the Daily Journal is like, or tell our listeners?
Sure. I mean, it's, people talk about news being a 24-hour operation, and we're not quite. We're about a 20-hour operation. So start at 4 o'clock is when the press finishes printing our paper and the drivers pick it up. And I usually, around 7 a.m., I'll start checking my email, and I'll do that from home first thing. I get newspapers delivered to my house, and I have newsletters that I subscribe to, national and local ones, right, just to kind of keep up on what's happening. And then I get a ton of emails, probably about 400 a day. That aren't spam. With spam, I probably get 600, but about 400 that I have to address in some way.
Yeah,
and they just keep coming, right?
Sure.
And so I'm sort of dealing with that, right? There isn't a moment where I'm not thinking about what my inbox is looking like. If I'm away from it for a couple hours, I think, oh my God, I have to go back there.
Are you still doing this while you're home, or are you now at work?
So I'm at home. In between all this, I'll bring my daughter to school, and I'll make breakfast and that type of thing, and get ready, maybe go to the gym. But at the gym, I'm also reading, too.
Yeah.
But then I usually go into the office around noon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also checking in with the reporters before noon just to kind of see what's going on with them. And they'll check in with me, and I'll check in with them and just kind of establish sort of what we're doing. Although I have a template of what they're doing for the week, because we have they submit their budgets, their weekly budgets on Mondays, and we go over that. And then of course things change, right? So, a reporter will say, well, I was planning on doing this, but this came up, so do you think I should do this and this and this, or what should I do? And we talk about it. We do that sort of throughout the day. And around, so between noon and 4 is when I kind of schedule meetings in person or over the phone. And then I also, around 4 o'clock or so is when I try to get away from that and start settling into editing the first drafts of the news stories as they come in. So they come in anywhere between 4 and 8, and I'll edit that and go over those with the reporter. In the meantime, I'm also checking the international, national, state cues, business cues, sports cues to kind of check in and see what's going on with those. Talk to the page editor, the sports editor, and talk about sort of what our plan is for the paper. If we're going to run an AP story on the front or something else on the front, or we're just going to go all local, what our art is, that kind of thing. So around 7 o'clock, actually around 5:30 or so, I start getting proofs of the pages from the layout page designers. And then I'll check those over. And then around 8 o'clock or so is when the front page is ready to check. And will check that, and then I'll go home. And then if I haven't checked it, then they'll send it to me to look at. And then, I usually will check my email one more time before going to bed. But those guys finish up around midnight. And then send it off to the press, and then the press works anywhere between 12 and 4 to get our paper printed, and then the drivers pick it up around 4, and we start all over again.
And where's it printed at?
We're printed at the Examiner. The San Francisco Examiner has a press, and we print up there.
So it's like separate. They have separate presses, one for the Examiner then, and one for the Daily Journal. I think they have a total of 3 presses and of varying sizes. Right, it depends on the run. Right.
So they'll use a different press for the smaller runs, bigger print. But they do a lot of. I'd say they probably do. I don't know this for sure, but probably do about 15 to 20 other publications. A lot of ethnic press, a lot of weeklies.
Boy, a lot going on.
Yeah, and a few dailies, and so they'll just kind of shove us in there in the run.
Getting back to the front page of the newspaper in general for a moment, the afternoons when you're selecting your articles from, say, is it AP or Reuters and all that? Is that how you say it, Reuters or Reuters?
Reuters, yeah.
Right. You're selecting those articles. Did you pay for that kind of wire service?
We pay a lot for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a yearly subscription that you pay, or they pay by the article? How's that work?
No, we pay I think it's per quarter for AP, but it's about $1,500 or maybe more. I think it's like $1,800 a week for AP stories.
Yeah.
And then Reuters, we don't use their news content, but we use their photos. And that's a little bit cheaper. It's about $600 a week.
Yeah.
And that's a good deal. We're grandfathered in on that one. I think if we were to start new, it'd be triple that. And then we also subscribe to Bay City News, which is a local wire service. And so we get our articles from those sources as well.
So when do you how do you make the decision of what goes above the fold or below the fold?
Yeah, we make that in the afternoon. Basically, we just go with what we think is the most interesting and compelling story of the day.
Yeah, and then assigning reporters to different projects. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to. The grisly murder that happened in San Carlos a few days ago. How did you happen to assign a reporter to that? Is there somebody calling to you and say, "Hey, I'd like to cover that"? Or
No. Our reporters are in the newsroom. So basically, Curtis covered that. He was working on a couple different things. I think one of them was San Mateo City Council study session, right? And yeah. I think I heard it over the scanner first, some action, and then went and saw there was a small release that the sheriff's office had put out about a beheading in San Carlos. And so immediately that's something to cover, right? And so I said to Curtis, there's a press conference in a few minutes. Can you go down there? So he just dropped everything and went.
And then he stays at the press conferences, he asks questions, and he's taking notes and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then he went over to the scene and see it, like if he could talk to any witnesses, and he got one. Yeah. And then went back the next day and talked to the father who was there. There was a vigil. So that's...
Will he continue to cover that, or will that shift around a little bit?
So he is our crime and court reporter. So he will cover it from start to finish.
And he'll do some other things in addition to that as well?
What do you mean? Like other types of stories?
Besides covering the murder, will he do other projects, or is he just going to stay with that? In other words, can he handle a couple of things?
No. He's going to be doing a bunch of different things. That's the thing about our reporters is that they're not just ever doing one thing.
Right.
So they do multiple things at once. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have one reporter just doing one thing at a time. But there's changes in the news industry. We don't have as many reporters. So, there's 3 reporters covering the entire county not the entire county, but in our coverage area, which is from South San Francisco down to Redwood City and then over to the coast. So he's covering multiple things at once.
So that leads me to a question I was going to ask later, but we might as well just ask it now. How many on the staff? 3 full-time, or do you have more than 3?
We have 3 full-time reporters, North County, Mid County, and South County. And then we have, so it's not a big operation. People have this idea sometimes that we're this large, entity with reporters all over the place. Oh, can you just put a reporter on this? Well, it's a little bit more difficult than that. And so we have a sports editor, sports reporter, and both of those guys do layout. And then we have a assistant editor who was also the page designer.
How many photographers?
We have a couple freelancers, but the reporters take their own. And then we have a couple freelancers as well.
Any interns going on at this point in time?
We have a pretty good internship program that started out pretty much right from the start. We had an intern who was 13 who just walked in and said, "Do you guys need help?" And that kind of started the program. Now we have about 5 or 6 high school students who come in and do various data entry tasks, extra things that we kind of don't necessarily need. But they'll do it, and then they write our weekly student news column that appears in the weekend edition.
Yeah. What about turnover? Do you find that the Daily Journal is like a stepping stone for young journalists? They'll come there and get some experience and move on eventually, or do they have a tendency to hang for a while?
Well, we used to have reporters stay for a long time, up to 10, 15 years or so, and then I'd say in the past 10 years or so, 5 to 10 years. People are struggling to stay longer because of the cost of living here. And we're not making more money. The entities that make more money are the Google, the Facebooks, all the social media. They're making the money. They're using our work, posting it online to make money through their advertising, and we don't get a cut of that. So, so I think it's just the challenge of the cost of living. Every industry faces this, right?
Yeah.
You go and you see help wanted signs all over the place.
No kidding. Yeah.
So, it's just a matter of that. As far as stepping stones to other publications, sure. Over the years, I mean, we have had reporters who have moved on to CNN, Washington Post, Mercury News, Seattle Times. All the
those are pretty great names.
Yeah, sure. Have done that over the years. And sometimes the reporters will end up going into government work, doing public information stuff for the various local cities.
Do you do all the interviewing?
For what?
For your reporters? When they're coming from the job apps?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. What's the circulation of the Daily Journal?
So we're anywhere between 25,000 to 33,000 print, right? And then we have about 6,000 to 8,000 online subscribers. When I say 6,000 to 8,000 is that it varies, right? Sometimes people will subscribe for a few weeks at a time, a few months at a time, and so it kind of goes back and forth.
Okay, explain this to me. Why can I go to the rack and grab a free paper, but if I go online, I have to pay? What is that about?
So if you go to the rack and you open up the newspaper, right, you see all these ads, right? You see the ads in print. That's what pays for most of our publication, whether it be online or print. Online is actually pretty expensive. We had to switch companies and servers a couple times because of the traffic and the weight of our archives. So we have archives all the way back to 2000, 20 years of archives.
My gosh.
If you're ever wondering what happened, in 2004 in San Mateo County, you could go back and read all of our archives. That takes a lot of bandwidth. So it actually costs us money to have that. So if you read online, you don't see these print ads. And so we have to make up for that somehow. And that's how we do it, by charging subscribers. Online subscribers.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Thank you. I've always wondered why that was happening, right?
Right. Yeah, you and everyone else.
Yeah, I'm
right?
glad I got the chance to ask. So is there a time when, the Queen just passed away last week. Do you print more papers the next day or that evening for that particular thing? Do you know what I mean for that particular instance?
No, we don't.
You don't?
We don't. If they sell out, they sell out, right? And selling out is sort of a term of art because they just, they're not sold; they're just taken out of the box. So,
right.
That's we do vary from 25 to 33 depending on the time of year. We tend to print less during the winter when it rains because fewer people go out to the boxes to get them. We also see more online readers during the winter, and during COVID, we saw a huge boom in online readership. And fewer people going out and seeing it in print. So we dropped down to 25. Now we're reaching back up to the 33 again.
That's funny. I always thought it was the reverse. I thought wintertime, because you're sort of at home and you're kind of cuddled up, you might want to, read the paper. And summertime, people are on vacations and whatever. But that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Are you aware of when an advertiser is not advertising with you anymore? Like, say the guy on the back page of your paper is not advertising anymore. Would you know that? Would Jerry Lee, the publisher, say something to you?
Jerry's never said anything about that at all. I may notice, but I have enough stuff to kind of think about overall. To think about if we drop in page counts, I may talk to Jerry about like what's going on with our ad revenue overall, right? But I don't talk about individual advertisers.
Okay.
I don't really. It doesn't affect me. That's Jerry's realm.
Got it.
And I got enough to worry about. So we kind of have a nice little split. He worries about the ads, and I worry about the content.
Well, let me ask you this then: would you be aware of, let's say you guys printed an article, and my company was advertising with you, but I didn't like that article and I dropped it. Would you be aware of that at all?
I never have.
Okay.
Been, and so I think the answer is probably no.
Okay.
I think I've had people who are advertisers pitch things to me and say I'm an advertiser, but I kind of find that irritating.
I would
because
too.
it's more about what the content is. I'm not going to do something because you're an advertiser. That's simply just not a good way of doing business.
Correct. Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So let's say you're young writers, or you're writers, right? And they have some different ideas about the direction of a story. How does that get handled?
We don't really have conflicts like that, to be honest. We have a pretty collaborative newsroom, and people tend to kind of follow along with what makes the most sense, right? So, I think sometimes the reporters have different points of view, and I think that we usually can just talk it out.
Okay.
Say, well, maybe this is not the story for that, but why don't we follow it on the next one? Because I think a lot of times, the one thing is that the reporters are trained craftspeople, right? I mean, they know what they're doing. They went to school for this. They know sort of what the craft of journalism is. So you have to sort of respect that in a way. But also I have a little bit more experience and I know a little bit more about this area, right? So usually in between those two things, we can find a good direction. So we don't really we haven't had conflict between us really. I never like killed a story or said like you can't do something like that. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. So usually we work in a collaborative way toward getting the story.
Are they given X amount of words to produce their story with?
Well, I mean, they have as many words as can fit in the paper, I guess. But usually if it goes over 1,400 words or so, I start asking, what is it? What are you doing here?
Right.
Usually it's about 800 per story, right? And 8 to 12 is kind of like within the realm of acceptability as far as a news story. And then once you get into a little bit more of that, it's usually we've talked about how this requires this many words. So I'd say, I think the longest story we ever ran was 2,400 words. And that was part of a 5-part series on nursing homes and sort of the oversight, some of the issues that we're having at some various nursing homes in this area. And so that was just a ton of work, and we had to just squeeze that into the 5 stories.
Your, let's see, 5 or 6 columnists. I think 6 if we include you, correct? Right columns?
Yeah.
Okay. All do a great job. How do you select a columnist? How does a columnist get selected?
I mean, I guess just over time we just sort of establish relationships, right? I've been trying very hard to have a conservative columnist. We have one that goes every other week, and I've been trying to get another one. But it's been difficult, I think, in this area. Most conservatives try not to expose themselves, right? And they certainly don't want to write a weekly column or every other week column. So that's been sort of a challenge. And I'll just put the word out. Talk to the Republican, San Mateo County GOP, and just see what they have. But the other ones are pretty easy. I mean, Sue I've known for a while, and when she retired from the council, she mentioned that she had always talked to Jerry Fuchs, who ran the Independent back in the day, about writing a column. And since that paper wasn't around, would I be interested? And I said, of course. And then Mark Simon I've known over the years, and he, I knew him from when he worked at the Chronicle, and he was interested. And John Horgan, of course, from the San Mateo Times, just sort of said, well, you're the paper now, so I'll write for you. So that's just sort of how it goes.
Yeah, they've all been columnists for you for quite some time.
That's true, yeah. And then Greg Wilson, who writes on Saturday, wrote a blog about various things in Redwood City, and I signed up for it, and I said, well, would you want to write for us once a week? And he said, sure.
Great.
So it's just sort of, it's not like, sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it just happens. So,
sure.
Yeah.
So let's stay on that particular page right now and talk about letters to the editor. How many do you receive each week, more or less?
On a typical week, probably about 30 to 40. During the election season, probably about 50 to 60.
Do you go over any of those letters with Jerry, the publisher?
No. I mean, he reads them in print and online, but he doesn't read them before. Jerry is very hands-off, and this is why it works so well, is that we talk about our business in generalities. How's everyone doing? I like this story, that kind of thing. As far as direction, like I said, he has enough to do with distribution and the ads, and I got enough to do with the new stuff. So he doesn't participate in any of the editorial decisions. So the decisions to print letters are solely mine.
And then you are printing X amount of letters depending on the room that you have on that particular page. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah. Do you see that? Do you notice that you get repeat letters from, or how do you say it? What am I looking for?
Yeah, we have
repeat letters from people.
We have a satchel, if you will, of regular letter writers.
Yeah.
Who are limited to 2 a month.
Oh, no kidding.
And sometimes it gets in their craw that they're limited to 2 a month, but they are. And every now and then we'll get a third one in there if I forget that they already wrote 2. But for the most part, we try to limit it to 2 a month. And so I'd say we probably have about 10 regular letter writers, and then we'll get letters from other people as well.
Yeah, I find that fascinating because as I read more and more, I'm starting to see names over and over, and I'm thinking that's pretty.
Yeah.
Is that a good barometer of how your paper is doing? I mean, how do you feel about that when you see those people continue to write?
I mean, I do appreciate people who write in regularly, even though, I'd say I probably agree with maybe 5 to 10% of our letter writers, because it usually is people on extremes.
Right.
It's either extreme left or extreme right. Every so often you'll get a very practical letter, and I say, oh, that's pretty good. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe the percentage is a little bit higher. But people have this idea that I select letters based on my own beliefs, and that is, I would have to be pretty schizophrenic to believe everything that is written by our letter writers. But I do appreciate the fact that people do write in and take the time to do so. And share their point of view, and sometimes the banter between the letter writers is pretty good. Sometimes it's a little irritating,
right?
But I do like it when new letter writers write in. So someone says, hey, why don't you ever write a letter about this? And I said, well, why don't you? And then they do, and I think, well, that's good.
Yeah,
that's important.
Yeah.
And every now and then there's a letter that sort of changes my mind on something, which is always fun.
Sure.
And you get a letter from someone who's maybe school age, and something that they've been thinking about for a while. And I feel like that's sort of, that's the point, right? And, just to have an open forum for people to express their points of view and their different things that they've been thinking about, and try to sway people to their side of thinking, I think is sort of like one of the things that's good about it, having a newspaper.
Yeah. Okay, so let's continue on that page or that theme right now. It seems to me that it's endorsement season going on right now.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so how does the journal arrive at endorsing somebody?
Right. Well, so we, at the very minimum, I mean, sometimes if there's more time, we'll do more stories about individual races. But right now, sort of the slate was finalized in late August, mid-August. And so we just got to it. We have 35 people that we have to interview, or 35 separate races with probably, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it, but I think it's definitely around 150 people that we have to talk to, 100 to 150. So we'll do interviews with them, and I'll ask questions, and the reporter will write up a story based on those questions. I also have a questionnaire that I've been sending out to the individual candidates to kind of get a sense of how they think. And then based on that, and then also sort of our experience with the city or the districts in which they're running for, and the answers to the questions which are based on what we think are the most important issues facing people in leadership positions for those district or governing bodies. Based on all that, we'll come up with a recommendation.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to go back to Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
Do you discuss these with Jerry as he's the publisher, or are you completely on your own with the way you go with these?
I don't discuss them with Jerry.
He really is hands off then.
He's pretty hands off. I think. I mean, he used to read them. He used to ask to read them in advance, but he never changed. He never said, "Well, I think we should do this."
Yeah.
But he doesn't ask that anymore. I think if I came out with an endorsement that was super weird, I think he might say something. But so far that hasn't been the case.
So you mentioned, do you actually interview some of the candidates yourself, or are you sending your reporters off to do that?
I ask all the questions of the candidates, yeah.
Over the phone? Do you do anything in person?
Well, we do in person, but the last few years, and even this year, we do it by Zoom.
Oh,
So
yeah,
by
correct.
Zoom, yeah. Which
Zoom.
makes it actually more convenient because a lot of times the travel and everything, getting people into our office
To
is
me, it's
difficult.
one of the best things that ever came around. But
Yeah, it's got its pluses and minuses,
Yeah.
but one of its pluses is for sure the ease of communication.
You better believe it, yeah. Okay, so let's say the owner of the newspaper came to you and said, John, I've got 8 more pages for you to work with, and you don't have to fill them up with ads. What would you like to use those 8 pages for?
Probably for all the stories that we're holding on to. Yeah, we would just run more stories, basically. There's never enough space. Like every now and then we'll have enough space in the paper to run everything that we want, how we want to run it. But it's always the day that we have an extra space is the day that we don't have enough stories. And then every other day we're super tight and we have extra stories that we have to hold or make smaller. So, yeah, and plus I don't think anyone... Jerry is the owner, publisher, would ever just offer up 8 extra pages. He's pretty frugal.
Okay. Oh, boy. Where's the future of print media going? I don't know if young people are reading the newspapers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think probably print will probably be gone in my lifetime for sure, and maybe even sooner. I think people are naturally gravitating toward online consumption of news in various forms. I think the idea of holding a newspaper and getting a newspaper and having a newspaper delivered is becoming archaic, right? I get newspapers delivered, but I'm the only one, on my block who does. I think the Examiner delivers for free, right? Don't they?
I think you get one on Sunday.
Sundays, yeah. Not to my house, which is funny because I'm probably the only person on the street that would read it, but they don't deliver it to me for some reason. Yeah, I think people are moving online. So people talk about newspapers, right? So I think the idea of a newspaper is dying and will die, and that's just a fact. But I think what will survive is the idea of a news agency, like a news organization, media. People will always look for a solid source of unbiased information, hopefully. And there will always be organizations that will provide it. So I think generally most newspapers would, if the revenue was 100% there online, would go online right this very second. And the reason why is because, I mean, print itself, the paper, has gone up, I'd say it's doubled in the past 5 years. We were facing issues with tariffs. We were facing issues with supply chain problems. Wood that creates the paper is in short supply. There's an environmental impact to that. We do use recycled paper. I think we're up to 80% recycled, but still there's a cost. I think there's that impact, and then also the physical driving it to various locations is an environmental impact, and there's a cost to that as well.
Yeah.
So probably if we were to eliminate our print edition, we would probably save about 40% of our expenses right off the bat. And then plus the printing itself is expensive.
Yeah.
And that's going up as well because, for supply chain and, they have to make repairs to these presses and that kind of thing. And then the ink itself is expensive. So I think that we could probably save money doing that. But the issue is that, as I said before, most of our revenue comes from the ads in the physical paper. So as soon as that balance shifts where more of our revenue goes online, I think more and more publishers, when I'm speaking I'm talking about the collective news industry, will probably move toward that realm. I think that for smaller papers like us, the move will be faster than some of the bigger ones. But ultimately, I think it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
People have these tablets where they can read it online. It's very easy. You can take it with you. You don't have to fold it. You don't have to worry about losing the paper because you're not going to lose your tablet.
Right.
So I think it's just the direction that we're going.
Yeah, boy. It's amazing when you think when I was a kid walking to school, everybody's front lawn had a newspaper. And then when you're coming home from school in the afternoon, everybody had an afternoon paper.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all disappearing now.
Yeah, so. And now, if you look at the immediacy of online, you don't need a morning and afternoon because the news is coming at you all the time.
One click, you're there.
Right.
Yeah. So going back to the journal for a moment, I really enjoyed page 2. The inside there where you have this day in history, and there's a bunch of things listed, and then you have all the guys at the movie stars turning this, because I'm always comparing myself. Oh, I'm 74. What's that guy look? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, but how's he doing?
How's he doing? But when I go over to the sports page, you do a great job with local sports. Don't get me wrong. I can never find major league standings or the top 10 hitters. How come you guys don't print that?
So we will soon. We are making the switch to a new online system. Basically, what we have, I'll spare you the details of it, but we have a 21-year-old system right now that helps us put our classifieds in. And so everything is tied to that. We have this server that is basically, it's like an Edsel, It's back there in the back room chugging along, it's the fourth incarnation of it. The drive's been cloned 4 times. It's been, there's been various walls put up within it to keep it running. And there's a certain point where we have to upgrade. And this is a huge operational expense for us, and we've been putting this off. So the system that enables us to do it will be on this new system, and it'll flow all of the data that comes from AP. There's a guy in Wisconsin who figured this out. It's a coding issue, right? And will flow immediately into our pages, and we won't have to reformat. So the issue is that we were getting fewer pages and smaller space for sports. And it was taking up to an hour for these sports guys to format this page. And then it got to the point where we just didn't have room for it. So they said, well, why are we spending all this time to do it? People could just see it online. But I think that people are very much interested in it. So I'm looking forward to probably after the first of the year having that again in our pages, because I think the Chronicle doesn't have it, and so we'll be a source for that.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoy that part of it.
So that was a long answer. The short answer is a technical issue.
Of course. Of course. Just a couple of more questions, if you don't mind.
No.
What's the most important thing you learned as a young reporter?
I mean, think of the reader, right? People think that, the sources, a lot of times our sources think that their viewpoint is the most important thing, right? And it is, because that's their viewpoint. But for us, we have to think of the reader and think of how this information is being conveyed to the reader. So it's multiple sources, not just one side conveying this, right? So I have to think of sort of the full range of reader, whether it be someone who's retired or someone who's a working mom, single mom, someone who's been in this area for 40, 50 years, who's wondering why all the changes, to someone who's like, I can't afford to live here, why is it so difficult? So you have to think of all the different ranges of readers. But I think the primary thing for me is our job is to take cold facts and heat them up. That's the main thing. All the stuff that happens at these city council meetings and the planning commission meetings are dry as dirt, right? Or dry as dirt in August, I think is the phrase, right? California August. I flubbed that one. Anyway, you got what I'm saying, right?
Sure.
So what we have to do is sort of give it some life and present it in a way that's interesting for our readers, right? Because if you don't interest them, then they're not going to continue reading. So that's the whole point, is to make something interesting that wasn't, while still adhering to the facts of the matter and also thinking how this is being read by everyone in the community overall.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. In your journalism career, going all the way back when you were a child and all that good stuff, are there any days that really stand out in your memory?
I mean, I think the big one for me was the explosion fire in San Bruno. And it was the day before my wedding anniversary, and I think that I was making plans for that, and we were sort of wrestling with, it was kind of a slow news day, and we were wrestling if we were going to put a blue ribbon school on the front page or Teacher of the Year on the front page. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about the news business, Teacher of the Year is important, but it's not front page news necessarily, right? And I was on the phone with my wife talking about, I'm not, wrestling between these two stories, but on the front it's kind of a slow day. And I see Bill Silverfarb, who works for David Canepa now, he's San Mateo County Supervisor, shuffling outside, and he said, "There's a little something going on in San Bruno. I'm going to go check it out." So, and he was almost running. And if you know Bill, if he's running, something's going on, right? So I went inside and I checked it out, and the first notice was that there was a plane crash, 6-alarm fire and a plane crash. It wasn't true. It wasn't a plane crash. It was an explosion. But that was the magnitude of it, and it was in the flight path. And from there on out, for the rest of the day, and probably for the next 3 months, everything that we did revolved around that situation, right? And there was Bill, who was from San Bruno and knew the neighborhood and knew how to get beyond the barricades into the neighborhood. One time he was calling me, and he said, "I have to move. The paint on the house just melted off, or came off the house."
Wow.
And he was on the scene, and then another reporter went to Bay Hill, where the Molly Stone is, and that was sort of a recovery area.
Correct.
And got all those stories there. And from an impact to a neighborhood and the repercussions for years to come over how that pipeline blew, all that started at that point. And everyone came together, and I remember being on the phone just trying to find out what happened. I was calling state senators, assembly members, everyone in the county, just to try to find out more information. We got as much as we could out there, put it out there. We won an award for our coverage. And after that, all the stories were trying to get more information of people who are desperate for it, right? Not knowing where their loved ones were, not knowing where they could get help, and connecting the people to those services and that help, right? While also making sure that all the offers for help were legitimate, because there were some scams that were going on.
That's so
and checking in and making sure and validating all of that was our first obligation. And we're newspaper people. That's not we're not first responders. We're not heroes. We're not people that go and help people out on the scene and save people's lives, right? But what we do is we connect people to services. We connect people to each other. We connect people to places that can help. And we just kind of fulfilled that role as best we could for the next few months. And I felt like, for me at least, that was sort of very meaningful that we were able to do that. to play our part in the community and make things a little bit better.
Gosh, amazing. Amazing story, amazing time. That was incredible.
It was. It was.
Congratulations on the award, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Jon Mays, we're done.
All right. Well, thanks for your time,
Thank
Mark.
you very much.
Good
I
questions
certainly
today.
appreciate you coming by and doing this with us. I'd like to thank our guest today, the man who gets all the news out before it's news, Jon Mays, editor-in-chief of the Daily Journal. Thanks to Mike for ideas and editing, Shelby for producing, and our musical director, Bray. You can hear more of Bray at bray.com. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this podcast, and no part of this program can be recopied or broadcast without permission. So until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.